Well, this is a discussion that we had to save for lunch. This session is entitled Water System Transfiguration. Here in Orange County, it's hard to believe there are actually parts of the state where clean, safe, reliable water doesn't just magically flow out of the tap. More than 300 small water systems in the state, some privately owned, that chronically serve contaminated drinking water or cannot provide reliable water service. I think everybody agrees something has to be done about it. And we've assembled a panel of guests that are working to do something about it. Senator Bill Monning from Carmel has authored legislation that intends to rescue these failing water systems. John Coupal, who is president of the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, the largest Taxpayers Association in California, and longtime defender of Prop 13, and Paul Jones is the general manager of Eastern Municipal Water District in Western Riverside County. His agency has a different take on how to fix the non-compliant weather systems. Now, Senator Monning was set to kick this discussion off. He had a plane ticket to be here. He was looking forward to being here. Unfortunately, he found out yesterday that the legislature would not be wrapped up in time for him to be here, and he would be unable to Skype because he's doing his elected business. So he has videotaped his portion of this discussion. His proposed solution, the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund. Senator Bill Monning.
Well, good morning. I'm Senator Bill Monning. I'm the author of Senate Bill 623, and I regret that I can't be with you today, but do appreciate this opportunity to join you via our technological link. I want to offer my greetings to the annual Orange County Water Summit, to the water districts there, other stakeholders that have gathered, and again to thank you for this opportunity to share our perspective on the importance of Senate Bill 623, which is now a trailer bill in Governor Brown's budget for 2018-19. Let me start by just sharing some of the background. I know many of you are perhaps familiar with this, but we're looking at a crisis in California that is really unparalleled in scope, yet most Californians aren't familiar with it. I think if you ask most Californians if they know about Flint, Michigan, they know of a lead problem with the water in Flint, Michigan. But here in California today, we have over 1 million Californians living without access to safe, clean drinking water. Some people say, oh yeah, we've heard about that. That's the Central Valley and agricultural areas. Yes, that's part of it, but it's a statewide problem. The pollutants are diverse. It goes from the Oregon border to the Mexico border, and we're looking at water systems, what they have in common. They tend to be disadvantaged communities, they tend to be smaller communities, and they don't have the capacity with their ratepayer base to raise the funds necessary to secure safe, clean drinking water or to provide operations and maintenance support if they're able to establish a filtration system or other remedies to the problem. So again, focusing on the problem, we have a spectrum of contaminants, certainly nitrates from agriculture and dairy, but we also have what we call naturally occurring pollutants, including lead, chromium-6, arsenic, uranium. These are naturally occurring. They can be more prominent during drought when groundwater systems are strained and stressed, and yet there's no polluter who we can point to. There's no entity that's responsible for that pollution. But for the water consumer, there's no relief. There's no remedy. We have families throughout the state of California who not only can't drink the water that comes out of their tap, something we all take for granted. They can't bathe with the water. They can't cook with the water. And they're required to buy bottled water, often at a cost of $40 to $50 per week. These are families that are usually low income, can't afford that, and also often have to pay a monthly water bill for water they can't drink. So Senate Bill 623 provides a solution. The governor's trailer bill provides a solution. And it's a solution that's the result of over a year of negotiations involving multiple stakeholders, including representatives of water districts, and outreach to larger associations. At the cornerstone of the negotiations have been what we call environmental justice organizations, water districts, agricultural representatives, and again, none of these are monolithic entities. Agriculture has been represented by the Western Growers Association, but also by different specialty crops. And the position of agriculture in this is interesting. They say we recognize that we're responsible for some of this pollution, primarily through nitrates from fertilizers, and we're willing to be part of that solution. But when we look at the State Water Foundation, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that's invested a great deal to the research, we see the data that only about 30% of polluted water in California is the result of agriculture. 30%. So that means 70% is not traceable to agricultural uses of fertilizer or nitrates. 70% is attributable to what we call the naturally occurring pollutants, the arsenic, the lead, the uranium, the chromium-6. So the negotiated path to helping these communities with different forms of remediation is to bring all Californians together as part of the solution. We have agriculture willing to pay for about 30% of what we estimate the need is for remediation. And that's at around $100 million a year total. About $30 million to be gained from agricultural fees, and about 70% or $70 million from ratepayers statewide, but with this caveat: families who are at 200% of the federal poverty line or below would be exempt from paying what we call is a de minimis fee, a fee not to exceed 95 cents per month for California ratepayers. Now, understandably, there are water districts, many of you assembled today, represented by Aqua and other associations, who say we agree there's a problem, we agree there needs to be a solution, but we oppose a solution that includes asking our ratepayers to pay a de minimis fee. Our ratepayers are already asked to pay fees to protect and remediate our water systems. But here's the difference. The larger water systems have ratepayer bases that can raise the necessary resources to provide safe, clean drinking water to their ratepayers. The problem with these smaller disadvantaged communities, there's no rate that can be sustainable in these poor communities. You can't charge $500 a month per family or $1,000 a month per family. It's just not attainable, and it's simply not sustainable. So our solution looks to all Californians to hold hands to address a profound human rights crisis and say, no, we don't like paying more rates, we don't like paying taxes, but if the result of me paying no more than 95 cents per month will result in over 1 million Californians having access to their human right of access to safe, clean drinking water, well then, maybe that's a price I'm willing to pay. 95 cents per month. Never to exceed that. People say, well, it's 95 cents now and it will be raised. But this requires a 2/3 vote in both the Assembly and the Senate to be considered by the governor to be signed. So there's no way the mechanics that have been negotiated that the rate payments can change without going back to the legislature for a 2/3 vote. So it's frozen at 95 cents per month or less. And an advisory board representing stakeholders from throughout the state, from ratepayers to agriculture to environmental organizations, will manage the funds collected with the State Water Board and with the State Treasurer's Department. The legislation prohibits any of that money being diverted into the general fund. It can only be used for the purpose for which it would be raised, and that's to get clean, safe drinking water to all Californians. Now look, I'm the first to acknowledge this is tough. It's tough for many water districts. It's tough for many ratepayers. But I also want to share with you, I'm very encouraged by the support we have received from various water districts, from ratepayers who say, you know what? We want to be part of this solution. We want to be part of a public health necessity to bring safe, clean, affordable drinking water to all Californians. So I'll just close. I know you have other speakers today, and you'll have a robust conversation on this. I apologize again that I can't be there to answer questions directly. I've tried to anticipate some of your questions. I would just close by saying my passion around this issue is representing a district that includes everything from Pebble Beach to Salinas Valley to Castroville to Watsonville. I represent agriculture. I represent poor communities. I represent very wealthy communities. And I'm encouraged to hear from constituents who say, you know what, we want to join you and be part of this. So that's my passion for this, is we're within reach. We've never been closer to fulfilling the state of California's commitment to the human right to safe, clean drinking water. So again, I wish you all well in your deliberations today. Again, my apologies that my schedule prevented me from joining you. I do appreciate this opportunity. I appreciate what you all do for your ratepayer base and delivering safe, clean drinking water in your districts, and I hope you will consider joining us in extending this precious right to all Californians. Thank you so much.
We thank Senator Monning and his staff for getting us the video in time for the discussion. Now, John Coupal is the president of the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. John says public goods charge, AKA a water tax, is not the way to fund this problem. John? Nice to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you all very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I can just say very briefly that our position is we're in an unusual position of being in alignment with Aqua, which doesn't happen very often. That's my entire presentation. Thank you. No, I think, look, there are a lot of needs. I think Jerry Brown said the needs are many, the resources are few. That's actually not true, because right now California has a lot of resources. But I don't think we can have this discussion without putting the entire context of California's fiscal situation into context. And by the way, next Wednesday is the 40th anniversary of Proposition 13, and we are looking forward to our... Thank you. The applause wasn't matched by boos, because sometimes in a public sector group I get both. But the reality is Prop 13 had two specific purposes, Howard Jarvis and Paul Gann. The primary purpose, for those of you who were around in the mid-'70s, was to keep people from being taxed out of their homes. The second purpose was to start slowing down the rate of growth of government in California. On the first score, Proposition 13 was a remarkable success. The way Proposition 13 works, of course, is you've got a reasonable tax rate of 1%, and your annual taxable value can only go up 2% a year. On the second score, Prop 13 has been a failure. Prop 13 has really done nothing to slow down the rate of growth of government in the state of California. And again, this part of my discussion is much like you've heard from John Morlock, your senator. But California already has the highest income tax rate in America, highest state sales tax rate, highest gas tax, highest car tax, very high business taxes, and even with Proposition 13, we rank 17th out of 50 states in per capita property tax collections. There were some early discussions this morning about debt. I have a different opinion on the debt service ratio. Yes, it is low, about 4%. It's between 4 and 5%, but that doesn't include unfunded pension obligations. And for those of you in Orange County, we know what can happen with pension funds. So I think we have to, there are some dark clouds on the horizon generally. We have massive amounts of debt, and we're already beginning to see significant out-migration out of the state of California by middle-class individuals. That's your ratepayer base, that's our tax base, and California is quickly becoming a state of two populations, the very wealthy and the very poor. And I could go on about, our view of the dangerous state of California's fiscal situation, and if you think I'm depressing, again, listen to Senator John Morlock. He will drive you to drink with his assessment. Our mission since 1978 has been like the game whack-a-mole. We passed Proposition 13. It was a short proposition, and we wanted to, we should have anticipated, or Howard Jarvis should have anticipated, the creation of a large number of loopholes. And so our existence in the last 40 years has been a series of back and forth trying to close some of these loopholes. The first one, right out of the box, the California Supreme Court defines special tax and special district in a way that allowed local governments to abuse that. So we came back with something called Prop 62. Prop 62 was a statutory initiative, so the charter city said doesn't apply to us, so we came back with Prop 218. Most of you are familiar with Prop 218 because that does impose some limitations on the manner in which you raise water fees. The primary objective of Prop 218, though, was in the form of benefit assessment districts. Traditional benefit assessments were a financing mechanism to provide specific benefits to property that were in proximity to the improvement. But as we saw after the Knox versus City of Orland case, local governments were using benefit assessments for a park 20 miles away. So one of the primary purposes of Proposition 218 was to deal with benefit assessment districts, but then we foresaw, having seen this series of loopholes being created, that, hey, we better take care of property-related fees. And by the way, Prop 218 went through 47 drafts, and we dealt with a lot of stakeholders on that. And I think we got it pretty much right. There's some things that I would have done differently, and we can discuss that later. But there have been loopholes created in 218, so the business community supported Proposition 26. That has proved to be very ineffective, so they're coming back for November for something called the Tax Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency Act. Again, this is the fourth generation of trying to correct some of the abuses of some local governments. Our primary objection to this particular tax, it obviously involves local control. I don't know if any of you remember something called Proposition 88 back in 2006. It was a proposal to impose a statewide parcel tax for education purposes, $50 per parcel. It almost passed. I'm joking. It got 23% of the vote, 76.7. I've never seen a vote margin like that on any proposed tax increases in the state of California. Another example of where this happened is with the infamous fire tax. We are plaintiffs in a class action lawsuit against a statewide tax imposed on those properties in the state responsibility area. Interestingly enough, like in this situation, we have a bunch of local districts, fire protection districts, who are our plaintiffs in that lawsuit because they see that state intrusion into their bailiwick is not a healthy thing. So what's key here? The key is local control, and that is our objection to this particular proposal. We do not dispute at all the need to provide relief, regulation, and a remedy for the problems that the senator was just talking about. We don't dispute that at all, and I don't think any of you do. But here is where we part company. This is clearly, and as he admitted, it's going to require a 2/3 vote because it's not a fee, it is a tax. There is little to no nexus here between somebody in Siskiyou County paying for nitrate remediation in the Central Valley. So at least there is an admission here that it is a tax with very little or no nexus. The memorandum put together by Aqua in terms of the proposals that they've come up with, I think are pretty good. They list a number of alternative funding sources, including federal funds. There's access to federal funds, general obligation bonds, the assessments related to nitrates. The senator was talking about that on the agricultural community. Perhaps GEO bonds, although I have some issues with that. Creation of an irrevocable trust, lease revenue bonds. I'm a little concerned about that. Cap and trade funds. I would say if they use cap and trade funds for this, that would be a whole lot better than the high-speed rail project, which they're spending. Okay. The billions of dollars that they're wasting on that project that will never be completed, you can take that to the bank. Every intelligent transportation expert on the planet will tell you that that is not a viable project, and it's just a money suck right now. But our solution, quite frankly, is simple. We have a $130 billion general fund of a $6 billion surplus. Is groundwater contamination, is this kind of contamination a public health issue? Yes, it is. What's the first job of government? It's to deal with public health issues. The state of California spends money on things it has no business spending money on. This should move to the top of the priority list, and we should provide adequate funding to deal with this critical problem. The numbers that the senator mentioned with respect to funding, $125 million a year. Folks, $125 million a year is budget dust at the state level. So we can fund these kinds of, this important program, and it wouldn't be that expensive relative to other projects. Thank you all very much.
Excellent job, sir. Good. All right, so John says turning water districts into tax collectors is the wrong move. Now, Paul Jones, you say there's another piece of legislation that Eastern Municipal Water District helped put together that is a proper remedy for this situation. Come on up and explain. Paul Jones, folks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Fritz. Appreciate it. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to address you. I want to thank MoDOC and Orange County Water District for putting on this summit. They do a great job every year, and I really appreciate the opportunity to participate. I don't think anybody in this room disputes in any way, shape, or form that this is an issue that must be resolved. I'm a native Californian. I'm a water professional with 25 years experience, and having hundreds of thousands of people in the state of California without safe drinking water is something that's simply unacceptable, and I don't think any of us dispute that. However, we really need to look just beyond the financial element of this and really need to come up with solutions that focus on the root cause. What's causing this problem, and what's making it such that these small water systems throughout the state can't provide safe and affordable drinking water? So I really want to focus my presentation on that, on what some of the root causes are and what some of the solutions might be. So what are the common issues that these agencies that can't provide safe drinking water share? First, and it was mentioned previously by Senator Monning, the vast majority of these systems, and there's 329 of these systems, are very small and do have insufficient rate bases. They're unable to implement complex water quality solutions, they repair infrastructure, or even secure external funding. What this is referred to in the industry is TMF, or technical, managerial, or financial capacity. And that can be in forms of staff resources or even things like creditworthiness and the ability to get credit to do capital improvements. Also, and what's interesting in looking at these entities, and we've looked at the tax records as well as the financial reports for a dozen of these small failing water systems, is they have very high per customer overhead. And those overhead expenses as a ratio of their total expenses is very high. And what do I mean by overhead expenses? First, the cost for their manager to support their board, their accounting functions, water quality testing, financial reporting, things like office space, insurance. All those are overhead expenses that we all share as water agencies, and that are overhead expenses associated with running our municipal businesses. However, what we found is the overhead rates for these small entities under 1,000 service connections typically are over 60%. That means 60 cents on every dollar paid by their customer is going to overhead expenses. What's interesting is you go up the scale in size, systems in 5 to 10,000, they're typically in about the 35% range, and the largest of systems over 100,000 are in the 20 to 30% range. Also, the fourth item is that these are all primarily in disadvantaged communities. And affordability is an issue, but also because of the use of rate revenue and the high overhead expenses, those rate revenues that are available are really not being used very efficiently. This graphic really shows this quite clearly. This is from the state's Human Right to Water portal, the Drinking Water Database. It shows the 329 systems that are currently out of compliance. And what it shows that 83% of this problem resides with systems that serve under 1,000 customers. If you think about that, that's 400 service connections or 400 accounts. And if you go back and you look at those overhead expenses that I mentioned, and you try to spread those overhead expenses over 400 service connections or 400 accounts, the math just doesn't work. As a side note, a lot of these systems are not only public systems, but are mutual and private water agencies. About 60% of them are private systems, mutuals and mom and pop water systems that are literally owned as small businesses, and about 40% are public agencies. So when we look at this data, what really calls out to us is the root cause of this problem is really the service delivery model. The service delivery model of ultra-small water systems is broken, and we really need to focus on that in the solution set. Now, I want to shift gears to Senator Monning's presentation, SB 623 and the budget trailer bill, and the question is, does that really provide the best solution? We have several concerns in looking at this bill. One of the key concerns is that the economic basis for the revenue that the bill generates is really unsupported, and that the cost allocations are really inequitable. And I want to unpack that a little bit. If you look at the economic study that was for the basis of the bill, which was prepared by the bill proponents, has been reviewed by the state agencies, that it assumes that basically all these small failing water systems continue to exist, that there's fairly expensive treatment that's put on those systems and essentially subsidized operation into perpetuity, and that in some cases they don't even treat the source water. The economic study assumes that home treatment devices will be purchased for their individual customers and subsidized by the state through this fund. Also, importantly, this doesn't assume any consolidation. So the economic study does not assume any consolidation. It doesn't assume any interconnection of systems, which can provide lower cost water supplies. And in fact, it does that even though a recently completed UC Davis study showed that 67% of these failing water systems lie within 500 feet of an entity that could potentially provide water service. So the other part that's a concern about this is the cost allocation side. As Senator Monning said, the agricultural community has agreed to contribute to this fund. This graph shows that. It basically shows the cumulative contributions over 30 years. The agricultural fertilizer and milk fees are shown on the bottom. They comprise about $30 million per year. And what's shown in the very large blue wedge is really the portion that comes from the water tax or the public goods charge. That results over 30 years of collecting $5.25 billion versus the $360 million which would come from the ag fees. The other issue that we have with this legislation is it really doesn't get to the root cause of the problem. It really provides a subsidy for a failing water system delivery model. And in fact, a subsidy from the state is not going to provide any incentive for these small systems to improve efficiency or consolidate. The other point that's been made by John very well is there are a lot of other funding sources that are currently available. The budget adjustment now shows a $9 billion surplus after filling the rainy day fund. And as mentioned earlier, one of the concepts is to develop a trust, and this is being advanced by Aqua, and use that trust with a contribution from the general fund to help fund these needs on an ongoing basis. We also heard about water bonds. If you look just at Proposition 1 and Prop 68, there's $4.1 billion worth of money available in the Safe Drinking Water Fund and the Groundwater Fund that could be used for this purpose, and that is earmarked for a portion of earmarked for disadvantaged communities. So the funds are clearly available. The other thing I think that's been a broader concern to the water industry is, and it was mentioned, is this the end of it? Isn't this just the camel's nose under the tent? That once a water tax is established, that there will be efforts to increase that on an ongoing basis. And as Senator Monning said, yes, his bill, 623 and the budget trailer bill, does cap that at 95 cents per month. But there's a lot of evidence that that's going to change. One of those things is AB 401. This was legislation passed in 2016. It requires that the state board identify and put together recommendations to the legislature on a low-income rate assistance program. Included in that is a study that was prepared that recommended an additional charge of $4.23 as a water tax or a public goods charge on top of that. The Department of Water Resources has also gotten in the act, and if you've had a chance to look at the draft California Water Plan update for 2018, Chapter 4, which is a new chapter and addresses additional funding sources, identifies a tax and assessment of about $10 per month. So very quickly, that 95 cents per month water tax becomes $15.18 cents per month if all of these are implemented. And if you look at that relative to an average water bill, that's a 27% increase over time. So what we are really proposing is that we kind of shift gears and look at the structural service delivery model and start with fixing that. AB 2050, which has been introduced by Assemblymember Caballero, who represents the Salinas area, really is legislation that would focus on reforming the structural service delivery model. This bill passed out of the Assembly this week. It's going into the Senate. And it provides a process where the small failing water agencies that are found to be chronically non-compliant or a threat to public health are essentially dissolved. Those corporations are dissolved. They are reformed into larger regional water agencies and water authorities. Those water authorities have financial resources and tools that we have as larger agencies to be self-sustaining. They have access to municipal bond funding. And they also have economies of scale through now the merger of hundreds of these agencies into a few dozen agencies that will allow that existing ratepayer revenue to be applied to core operations. It also establishes that TMF that I talked about, that technical, managerial, and financial capability that is so essential to implementing complex water quality solutions and running viable water agencies. And it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. We estimate that the bill would address about 200 to 250 of the failing water agencies and form probably about 25 to 27 new water entities out of those 250s. But there still will be a need for individual consolidations and other efforts to resolve some of these failing systems. I think most importantly out of this, what we feel is AB 2050 is really a model that gets to the core of the issue. It's the best path forward, and in our mind, it'll be the best path to ensuring safe drinking water for all Californians. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Very informative. John, you were talking about in Bill 218, there are lots of loopholes that you wanted to talk about if we had an opportunity. This is that opportunity.
Well, first of all, I think one of the things that we tried to do with Proposition 218 is to reflect cost of service principles, and I think a lot of people in this room are very supportive of that. When we were drafting 218 and dealing with the water issue, one of the things that stuck in my mind was we would be getting phone calls from engineers, a lot of them with LA Department of Water and Power, who were saying, hey, you guys have got to investigate this siphoning off of enterprise funds for the general fund, and they were willing to provide data, but none of them wanted to go public for fear of retribution. So, you know, our organization tends to get along really well with the engineers, less well with the political people, because I think, you know, our members are just taxpayers. We represent homeowners, and they understand that water isn't free. A lot of them are more sophisticated than you might think, and they're certainly willing to pay a reasonable level of for water. And I think they understand, as you do, that it should, for this kind of service, for water, sewer, refuse collection, fees should generally reflect cost of service, and that's the principle that we tried to reflect in Proposition 218. Now, Prop 26, again sponsored by the business community, has proved to be very, very weak, and I think that's one of the reasons why the business community is coming back with another proposal for November for November of this year.
And just one other question for you, John. It seems like our use of water is a statewide thing. We borrow our water from Northern California, so our water system and our water consumption really connects us all, northern and southern part of the state. So is it still right to say, as you posited earlier in your discussion, that if they've got a water poisoning issue in the northern part of the state, we shouldn't have to pay the tax down here, when we're all connected to the quality and the consumption of our water?
Well, I think we do pay the tax, and we pay it through income taxes and sales taxes that go into the general fund, and then we rely on the California legislature to set spending priorities to deal with generalized problems that need to be dealt with. But again, you know, water service, and I understand certainly conveyance is a statewide issue, but the actual, you know, if there's a specific problem unique to individual districts, we think that is better dealt with at the local level. And at the local level, if they're impoverished and don't have the capacity to do that, then we as a state do have a responsibility to respond. But I don't think we need to do that through the rate structure of water use in other areas. We can do that. We can finance that through another way.
Good. Folks, line up at the microphone for questions.
And by the way, I like what he's talking about here on the, you know, regional governments are not a panacea for anything. Everything's got to be judged on its own merits. But if you've got districts this small with significantly highly proportional overhead costs, it certainly makes sense to consolidate that. That'd be a good taxpayer issue.
And about that same thing, Paul, you were talking about the inefficiency of the ultra-small systems. Are you talking, and you were talking about the inefficiency of the delivery systems, are you talking about the infrastructure of the delivery systems, or just sort of the bureaucracy and the ability to?
Well, as I mentioned, Fritz, I think the issue there is the rate revenue and how it's deployed. And it really gets to overhead expenses. So it's kind of those base costs that you need to run one of these small water districts or small water businesses. And when you look at that as a proportion to how much an overall budget of one of these small entities is, it's huge compared to larger water agencies. As a result, when that ratepayer pays that water bill every month, and I might point out that anecdotally, people say, well, these Central Valley agencies that are failing, they have ultra-low water rates. They're undercharging for water. That's not the case. Many of them have water rates that are as high, if not higher than they are in the major urban areas. And that's largely driven by these high overhead expenses. So when so much of their ratepayer dollar is going to overhead, there's not much that can go to core operations. And if you add on top of that the need to operate a treatment system, for example, that really makes it unaffordable for those communities.
Got it. We have a question over here. Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you very much. Most of these districts might have one or two employees, maybe three at most. It's not very much, but it is a significant part of their overhead. But there's two core issues that you haven't really addressed. Number one, who was the land use planning agency that allowed these, trailer parks and everything, and many of these are trailer parks, to be put in, and what is their share of the responsibility? And shouldn't there be some, and wouldn't that discourage anything like this from happening again? That's the first of the questions.
Do you want me to answer that first?
Yes. Why don't you do that?
I think your point's well taken. I'm not sure from a responsibility standpoint who let that happen. I think the statutes of the state of California let those ultra-small systems become established. However, currently and statutorily, these systems couldn't be formed. You could not form a small system of that size and magnitude. It would have to be part of a larger water system, and you wouldn't be able to get a drinking water permit to operate those systems now. So we're really dealing with a legacy issue here.
Let's see if we can squeeze in one more question from
the
this
second
gentleman.
part of the question is, where are the regulatory people, and why has there not been a C&D, a cease and desist on these people to kind of force them out of business and force consolidation? And why are we waiting for legislation to do that?
Well, there have been previous legislative efforts to give the state board the ability to do forced consolidations. Those have not been used very effectively. And there have been consolidations, and I will say the PUC regulated entities have really done a great job of looking at these districts and consolidating them where they can. It's just we're not talking about a problem here that's a district here and a district there. We're talking about hundreds of agencies. And so we feel that AB 2050 really provides a much more kind of bold solution to really address the problem all at one time.
One final question. Yes,
okay. Nicholas Dibbs, former DW Water Education and Tour Coordinator for the State Water Project and teacher. I want to compliment both of you for doing the research and putting this problem in an excellent perspective. And that is, I want to ask, is there any effort to get people in the same room to sit down and come up with this so that it doesn't have to go to a statewide vote? And I think the AB 2050 will hopefully do that, but get people together and come up with the best way to deal with it. If you can get this bill to pass, that would be great. If not, then I hope there'll be an effort, and that's the question: can we get people together in the same room at the same time to address this issue? Thank you.
I think this is probably not the issue that you would realistically take to the voters as an initiative, because it's a very, very important issue, but it's rather arcane. I don't see going to the voters with saying, we want you to vote on small water district consolidation. I think this is something that is appropriate for the California legislature to deal with it. And I actually think if you make the good argument, it can happen. I think you'd get bipartisan support.
Thank you so much, John and Paul. Really a wonderful discussion.